The parents were portrayed in the film as being two nice people who go about their business, but surely have like no understanding of rock and roll, and were less than supportive of Buddy Holly's efforts.
That's probably a misconception. They were more supportive of Buddy than the few scenes therein would seem to indicate. They, of course, didn't exactly understand what Buddy was trying to do, but they certainly didn't stand in his way. And although the film doesn't say that they did stand in his way, there are no scenes in there where they're giving him their support.
Sometimes I think a biographical film, falls apart during the love interest sequences, because even a film with restraint sometimes gets very dramatic when it comes to showing the hero or heroine passionately involved with someone. What kind of considerations did you give to the direction of the love sequences?
Well, I tried to keep in mind always that these were kids. He was 22 years old. And again, if you have a 22-year-old in a deeply dramatic scene, it can stretch your believability only because they're kids. They're still exploring themselves and their mates, and they're not. I didn't want to try to construct some deeply dramatic relationship between them because they didn't have much time. They were only married 5 months.
It's not very long at all.
No, it's not.
This is just a detail, but when there's one scene where they're lying in bed together. They embrace for a moment of the scene and then talk lovingly for the rest. It's a fairly short scene, but they're both under the covers. And I said, well, I mean, very consciously, this is not going to be like an erotic love scene. This is just revealing part of their personality that you can.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to that whole thing of the 50s approach. I wanted to take a 50s approach to a love scene rather than a 70s approach to a love scene.
Interesting. How much of the film was shot on location and how much was shot in studios or, on created sets?
About 60-40, about 60% on location and 40% on sound stages.
How did you get access to sound stages since you were not working with a major company?
Well, there are a number of independent sound studios in Los Angeles. We were lucky enough to get into the Culver City studios, the old Cecil B. DeMille studios, where they shot Gone with the Wind and a lot of other really neat films. And they were much, much cheaper than the major studios, and no studio overhead charges or any of that stuff. So we sort of had the run of the place.
There's a sequence at the Apollo Theater. Was that shot at the Apollo?
No, that was shot in California in a theater there. And the exterior was shot in Atlanta.
Must be a great surprise to people driving down the street and singing like their Atlanta lows or whatever suddenly transformed into the Apollo.
Yeah, it's a kick, I think.
That scene was one of the sequences that I wasn't really sure of if it really happened when I was watching it, and I wanted to find out.
Yeah, it's a true story.
The story is that in the film that Buddy Holly is the first white act to play the Apollo on a black tour.
Well, they'd had a record released, That'll Be the Day It Was. And in New York, because the name on the label was the Crickets, everybody in New York assumed that this was another one of the black groups like the Spiders and the Spaniels and the Orioles, and this was a very black-sounding music at the time, because Elvis's music was still basically country rock, and Buddy's music was, if anything, closer to the black side of rock and roll. And so everybody just assumed that it was a black group, and they showed up at the Apollo and surprised everybody considerably.
So that's true.
That's true story.
The name the Crickets is said to have influenced the Beatles in the choice of their name. You were telling me that you recently met Paul McCartney.
Yeah,
did you ask him about that?
I had to ask him if that was true, because there are a lot of legends that arise because they make sense, not because they're true. And I asked him if that were true, and he said, yeah, it's absolutely true, but probably not for the reason you think. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, in America, the Crickets was an engaging name because it was a singing insect, but in England, they have no crickets, but they have a game called cricket. So all of the kids, sports fans that they were in London and the rest of England, really, really identified with a group called the Crickets. And John and Paul understood the subtleties of the fact that it was another play on the words because they knew about the American cricket. And when they chose their name, they also wanted to be in the same vein, so they chose the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The film, as I've mentioned, was an independent film, and I'm sure that a lot of people in the industry now have their eyes on you since the film has been successful, both I think in terms of box office and the critics' reviews of it. What does that mean? I mean, do you get the feeling that that's true, that people are kind of watching?
Well, Hollywood is one gigantic bandwagon. And as soon as you score, then everybody in town wants to jump on that bandwagon. So we've been getting a lot of attention from people wanting to do this and that.
What are some of the things that you think you might have proved in that film that you can do if you want to do it? We were talking before, for instance, about recording music, live on the film and having the actors really be the musicians as well instead of dubbing it in. Is there anything similar to that you think would have been scorned on, and said that if you had worked with a major studio, they would have said, no, sorry, you can't do it that way?
Well, a major studio would never have let us cast Gary Busey. We would have had to cast David Cassidy or some name in the role, and we felt that it can't be a recognizable name or recognizable face, or you end up with a real problem in transcending that name value when he's supposed to be Buddy Holly. So there's another example of the studios would have made us do it the traditional way, which is to get a star.
Mm-hmm. How Busey, that is also in his early 30s, I think, whereas Holly was 19 to 21 during the period that the film is supposed to take place in. It doesn't look that way, not to me.
No.
What did you have to do to? I'm sure he looks older than that.
Yeah, he's an actor.
Yeah.
He knows how to look young. It has to do with his body English and his demeanor and the way he spaces his words and so forth. Little subtleties that you really can't put your finger on, but that say to your eye and to your brain, this is a young guy.
The film, of course, takes place, the beginning of the film, in Lubbock, where Holly and the Crickets are all from. Have you been down there? Have they been showing the film down there?
Yeah, in fact, the film opened in Texas in May. That was the first part of the release pattern. And was very successful in Lubbock. And he's finally, I think, getting his due in his hometown. Sometimes you're less of a star in your hometown than you are anywhere else in the world. And for years, that was the case with Buddy Holly. For example, he came back to London in the late 50s. Came back to Lubbock from London in the late 50s after a triumphant European and Japanese tour, and got off the plane. Nobody met him. They could have cared less at the time.
You yourself live in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and common knowledge says that anyone who's going to make it in the film industry really ought to move right now to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Are you also, that's going to work, I guess?
Well, I think it's a matter of going against the grain. When I had to decide a number of years ago where I wanted to work from, you have to have access to New York and Los Angeles because, like you said, that's the entertainment centers. But I didn't want to join the ranks of other fledgling directors in Hollywood, thousands of them, who are trying to get a gig. Because what happened, the way I felt about it at the time, is what would happen to me is that in the process of working my way up through the ladder, I would give away a lot of the tricks that I have in my bag. And by the time I finally got the shot in 10 or 15 years, I might have already used up, what my limited repertoire is. I think almost any musician or artist has a limited number of changes in their head. And I didn't want to waste them on other people's work. So I felt that it would be best to stay out of town and make the mistakes out of town and then come in to Los Angeles already an educated filmmaker rather than a fledgling.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a move is maybe imminent. But
no, I'll never live. I'm renting an apartment in Malibu because I have to be there 3 out of the next 6 months but I don't think I'll ever settle in Los Angeles.
What brought you to become a resident of the Philadelphia area? I know that you are from Texas.
Well, I wanted to be within commuting distance of New York or Los Angeles, and there's no such thing in Los Angeles. You know, commuting distance still puts you right in Los Angeles. It's so big. And I didn't want to live in New York because I don't like big cities as a rule. And Philadelphia, you know, has so much cultural advantages, and it has Fairmount Park, and it has a lot of other things that make it bearable as a city for me, a country boy. So I just decided to take up residence here.
Well, I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Do you play rock and roll, or did you used to? I mean, because you seem
no,
to
I
have
was
such
into
a strong.
I was into classical music.
Uh-huh.
And was a music major in college. And in 1965, I heard Michelle by the Beatles, and it was not the kind of music I had been trained to play. And I said, "Forget it. You better do something else." So that's when I got involved with the Beatles. Really, is when I got involved in rock and roll and stopped playing. By the way.
Uh-huh, interesting. Well, Steve Rash, I want to thank you very much for being here this afternoon on
Thank you.
Fresh Air. Steve Rash is the director of the Buddy Holly story, which is playing in Philadelphia now. It's the film of the life of Buddy Holly.